alone in the desert night?" she asked. "Cowboy, do you fear me or desire me?" The gunshot echoed across the canyon before Jake Harris even saw the rider. His horse reared up, nearly throwing him from the saddle as the bullet whizzed past his ear and struck the rock face behind him. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of blood orange and purple, and someone was trying to kill him. Jake yanked hard on the reins, steering his mare behind a cluster of boulders. His heart hammered against his ribs as he drew his revolver, eyes scanning the darkening landscape for movement. Another shot rang out, this one closer, sending fragments of stone spraying across his face. He pressed himself flat against the cold rock, breathing hard. Then he saw her. A figure on horseback silhouetted against the dying light, riding toward him at full gallop. Long dark hair streamed behind her like a war banner, and she held a rifle with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how to use it. She wasn't shooting anymore, just riding straight for him, fearless and fast. Jake aimed his revolver, finger on the trigger, but something made him hesitate. The rider slowed as she approached, circling his position like a wolf sizing up prey. When she finally stopped, not 20 feet away, Jake got his first clear look at her face. She was young, maybe 25, with sharp features and eyes that glinted like polished steel in the fading light. "Drop the gun, cowboy," she called out, her voice steady and cold. "Unless you want the next shot through your skull instead of past it." Jake didn't lower his weapon. "You shot at me first, lady. I'd say that gives me the right to keep mine aimed right where it is." She laughed, a sound without humor. "Those weren't shots at you. Those were warnings. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be feeding the buzzards. What do you want?" She dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping her rifle trained on him. As she stepped closer, Jake noticed the way she moved, careful and calculated, like someone used to danger. She wore worn leather pants, a dark shirt, and a gun belt that had seen plenty of use. "I want what you took from the stagecoach 3 days ago," she said. "The lockbox, the one with the railway payroll." Jake's mind raced. He had no idea what she was talking about, but telling her that seemed like a good way to get shot for real. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me." She took another step forward, and in the growing darkness her face was half shadow, half moonlight. "I've been tracking you for 2 days. I know you hit that coach outside Silver Creek. I know you rode out alone, and I know you're carrying something worth killing for. You've got the wrong man. Do I?" She raised an eyebrow, and for the first time something other than cold calculation crossed her face. It might have been doubt, or it might have been something else entirely. Then why are you out here alone, riding hard toward the border with nothing but a horse and a prayer? Jake had no good answer for that. The wind picked up, carrying desert sand across the canyon floor. The woman stood there, rifle steady, watching him with those steel eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and the night closed in around them like a fist. She took another step closer, close enough now that he could see the scar along her jawline, the dust on her clothes, the determination etched into every line of her face. Close enough that he could see something else too, something dangerous flickering in her gaze that had nothing to do with the gun in her hands. "So tell me, cowboy," she said, her voice dropping to barely more than a whisper. "Do you fear me or desire me?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke, and Jake realized with a cold shock that he didn't know the answer. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe something worse than either. He tightened his grip on his revolver, knowing that whatever happened next would determine whether he saw another sunrise. The desert night pressed in around them, vast and empty and waiting, and somewhere out there in the darkness, something was hunting them both. Because if she'd been tracking him for 2 days, then she'd led someone else right to him too. Jake heard the horses before he saw them. At least 6 riders, maybe more, coming fast from the east. The woman heard them too. Her eyes widened, and for the first time since she'd appeared, he saw something like fear cross her face. "We need to move," she said, already backing toward her horse. "Right now. Who are they?" She didn't answer, just swung into her saddle with practiced ease. "You can come with me and maybe live, or you can stay here and definitely die. Your choice, cowboy." Jake made his decision in half a heartbeat. He holstered his gun, grabbed his horse's reins, and mounted up. The woman was already riding, heading west toward the rocky hills where the moonlight couldn't reach. He followed, leaning low over his mare's neck as the sound of pursuing hoofbeats grew louder behind them. The night swallowed them whole, and the real chase began. Whatever she thought he'd stolen, whatever those riders wanted, Jake knew one thing for certain now. This woman was going to be either his salvation or his doom, and he wouldn't know which until it was far too late to matter. The desert stretched out before them, infinite and unforgiving, and they rode into it together, two strangers bound by bullets and accusations, and something else neither of them wanted to name. Behind them, the riders closed in, and the night promised nothing but violence and blood. The canyon walls rose up on either side as they plunged deeper into the wilderness, and Jake realized he'd just traded one kind of danger for another. The woman ahead of him rode like she knew these paths, like she'd been here before, and that scared him almost as much as the men chasing them. Because if she knew where she was going, then she'd planned this. All of it. The shots, the accusations, the riders appearing right on cue, which meant Jake Harris had just ridden straight into a trap, and the only person who could save him now was the same person who'd set it. The woman glanced back at him, her face ghostly in the moonlight, and smiled a smile that held more secrets than the desert held sand. Then she spurred her horse faster, and Jake had no choice but to follow, racing toward whatever fate waited for them in the darkness ahead. Emma Cole had been planning this for 3 months, and the cowboy riding behind her was either going to make her rich or get her killed. She just wasn't sure which yet. The hoofbeats behind them were getting closer. She could hear the riders shouting now, angry voices echoing off the canyon walls. They'd found the trail faster than she'd expected, which meant someone had talked. Someone always talked. She guided her horse through a narrow gap between two towering rock formations, barely wide enough for a single rider. The cowboy followed, his mare's hooves striking sparks off the stone. On the other side, the canyon opened into a small valley, and Emma headed for the far end where she knew a cave system honeycombed the cliff face. "Who are those men?" the cowboy called out, his voice nearly lost in the thunder of hooves and wind. "Friends of yours, I thought," Emma shot back. "The men you robbed the stage with." "I told you I didn't rob any stage." She believed him now, which made everything infinitely more complicated. Because if he wasn't the man she'd been tracking, if he wasn't part of the robbery, then the real thieves were still out there somewhere, and she just wasted 2 days chasing the wrong man while leading a gang of killers straight to both of them. Emma cursed under her breath. This was why she worked alone. This was why she never trusted anyone else's information. But the money had been too good, the tip too solid, and she'd let herself believe it was going to be easy. Nothing was ever easy. They reached the cave entrance just as the first rider emerged from the gap behind them. Emma dismounted fast, pulling her rifle from its scabbard. "Get inside," she told the cowboy. "Now." He hesitated for half a second, studying her face like he was trying to read her intentions, then swung down from his horse and led the animal into the darkness of the cave. Emma followed, backing in slowly, rifle raised. The rider approaching was a big man on a bigger horse, and even in the moonlight Emma could see the badge pinned to his vest. Not outlaws, then. Law, which was somehow worse. "Emma Cole," the man called out, reining in his horse about 50 yards from the cave. "You know you can't hide in there forever." Emma's jaw tightened. Deputy Frank Walsh. She should have known. He'd been dogging her trail for 6 months, ever since that business in Arizona with the missing gold. She'd proven her innocence on that job, but Walsh didn't care about proof. He cared about arrests, and she was an easy target. "I'm not hiding, Frank," she called back. "I'm making a strategic withdrawal." Walsh laughed, a harsh sound that carried across the valley. "You got yourself a hostage now?" "That cowboy in there with you, he's wanted for stage robbery. You bring him out peaceful, maybe I'll go easy on you." So that was it. They thought the cowboy, Jake, or whatever his name was, had robbed the stage. They thought she was either his partner or trying to collect the bounty herself, which meant the real robbers had gotten clean away while everyone else chased shadows. Emma glanced back into the cave where the cowboy stood watching her, his hand resting on his gun. In the dim light filtering in from outside, she could see the question in his eyes. The same question she had asked him earlier, turned back on her now. Did he fear her or desire her? And more importantly, could he trust her? "We need to talk," she said quietly, low enough that Walsh couldn't hear. "Fast." The cowboy nodded once. "I'm listening. Those men think you robbed the stagecoach 3 days ago. They think I'm either with you or hunting you for the reward. Neither is true, but that doesn't matter anymore because we're both trapped in this cave with a deputy and his men outside waiting to either arrest us or shoot us, whichever comes first. So what do you suggest?"
Emma looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since she'd started shooting.
He was tall, lean, with the kind of face that had seen too much sun and not enough sleep. There was something steady in his eyes, though, something that made her think he might not break under pressure. She'd need that if they were going to survive the night. "I suggest we find another way out of this cave," she said. And then we find the real robbers before Walsh finds us? The cowboy smiled, a quick flash of white teeth in the darkness. You're crazy. Probably. You coming or not? He didn't hesitate this time. Lead the way. Emma turned and headed deeper into the cave, the cowboy and their horses following close behind. Outside, she could hear Walsh shouting orders to his men, surrounding the entrance, settling in for a siege. They had maybe an hour before Walsh decided to come in after them. Maybe less. Which meant they needed to move fast, find the back exit she was pretty sure existed based on the way the air moved through the cave, and get out before the whole thing turned into a bloodbath. The darkness swallowed them as they moved deeper into the mountain. Emma pulled a match from her pocket and struck it against the cave wall. The flame sputtered to life, throwing wild shadows across the rough stone. The tunnel ahead split into 3 directions. Any idea which way? The cowboy asked. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the air currents on her face. Left tunnel had still air. Center was blowing toward them. Right was pulling away, sucking air deeper into the mountain. That meant an exit, somewhere. Right, she said, and started walking. They moved through the darkness together, 2 strangers who'd tried to kill each other an hour ago, now bound together by necessity and the pursuit of men who wanted them both dead or imprisoned. Emma's mind raced, trying to piece together what had really happened with that stagecoach robbery. Someone had hit it 3 days ago outside Silver Creek. Someone had taken a lockbox with $20,000 in railway payroll. Someone had left just enough evidence to point at this cowboy, and then someone had fed that information to her, knowing she'd come looking, knowing she'd lead Walsh and his deputies right to their patsy. It was elegant, really. Frame the cowboy, let the bounty hunter find him, let the law clean up the mess, and walk away rich while everyone else killed each other over nothing. "What's your name?" she asked as they walked. "Your real name, Jake Harris. I work horses on a ranch outside Tucson. And you just happened to be riding through Silver Creek 3 days ago? I was visiting my sister. She's married to a blacksmith there. I left 2 days ago, heading home." Emma did the math in her head. The timing was wrong. If he'd left 2 days ago, he would have been in Silver Creek when the stage was robbed. But he wouldn't have had time to get this far south. Unless he'd been riding hard, which his horse showed no signs of. The mare was tired but not exhausted, not the way she would be after 3 days of hard running. Which meant Jake Harris was telling the truth. Which meant Emma had made a very expensive mistake. The tunnel opened into a larger cavern, and Emma's match finally burned down to her fingers. She dropped it with a curse and lit another. In the flickering light, she could see stalactites hanging from the ceiling like stone teeth, and in the far corner, a narrow crack in the rock wall with starlight showing through. "There," she said, pointing. "That's our way out." They squeezed through the crack one at a time, leading the horses carefully over the uneven ground. On the other side, they emerged onto a rocky slope that descended into another valley, this one heavy with pine trees and the sound of running water. The moon hung fat and bright overhead, turning everything silver. Emma breathed in the cool night air, her mind already working on the next problem. They were out, but they weren't safe. Walsh would find the back exit eventually, and when he did, he'd be on their trail again. They needed to disappear, and they needed to do it fast. But more than that, they needed to find out who had really robbed that stage, because until they did, both of them would be running for the rest of their lives. She turned to Jake, finding him watching her with those steady eyes. The question hung between them again, unspoken but loud in the silence. "I made a mistake," Emma said quietly. "I thought you were someone else. Someone who'd stolen something that belonged to people I owed a favor. I was wrong. And now we're both in trouble. Walsh won't stop until he's caught someone for that robbery, and we're the only suspects he's got. So we can go our separate ways, take our chances alone, or we can work together and maybe figure out who really did this." Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the moonlight. Then he nodded slowly. "Together. But if you shoot at me again, I'm shooting back." Emma smiled despite herself. Fair enough. They mounted their horses and rode down into the valley, heading west where the trees grew thick and the trails disappeared into shadow. Behind them, somewhere in the darkness, Walsh and his men were still searching the cave, still believing they had their criminals cornered. By the time they figured out the truth, Emma and Jake would be miles away. But distance wouldn't solve their real problem. Somewhere out there, the actual robbers were counting their money and laughing at how perfectly their plan had worked. They'd stolen $20,000, framed an innocent man, and set a bounty hunter and a deputy on a collision course that should have ended with everyone dead except them. What they hadn't counted on was Emma Cole being smart enough to figure it out, or Jake Harris being stubborn enough to survive. And they definitely hadn't counted on the two of them working together. Emma glanced at Jake riding beside her through the moonlit forest. He sat his horse like a man born in the saddle, comfortable and alert, his hand never far from his gun. He was either going to be the best partner she'd ever worked with, or the worst mistake she'd ever made. She'd find out which soon enough. The stream they'd heard from the ridge turned out to be a small river, running fast and cold through the valley floor. Emma followed it north, knowing the water would hide their tracks and the sound would cover any noise their horses made. They rode in silence for nearly an hour before Jake finally spoke. "Where are we going?" "Silver Creek," Emma said. "We need to talk to someone who saw the robbery. Get a description of the actual thieves. Walsh will be looking for us there. Walsh will be looking for us everywhere. At least in Silver Creek we might find some answers." Jake nodded, accepting her logic. They rode on through the night, two fugitives racing against time and law in the desert itself, bound together by accusations and bullets and a truth that neither of them yet understood. The river bent east after another mile, and Emma led them away from it, cutting through a dense stand of cottonwood trees toward higher ground. The terrain grew rougher, all broken rock and scattered brush, and their horses picked their way carefully through the darkness. Dawn was still 2 hours away when they reached the top of a low mesa. From there, Emma could see for miles in every direction. Behind them, no sign of Walsh or his deputies. Ahead, the land rolled away in waves of shadow and silver toward Silver Creek, maybe 10 miles distant. A thin line of smoke rose from the town, visible against the stars. "We should rest the horses," Jake said. "They've been running hard." Emma wanted to argue, wanted to keep moving, but she knew he was right. They'd be no good to anyone if their horses collapsed under them. She dismounted and led her mare to a patch of scrub grass growing between the rocks. Jake did the same, loosening his saddle girth to give his horse some relief. They sat on opposite sides of a flat boulder, not quite trusting each other enough to relax completely. Emma pulled jerky from her saddlebag and offered Jake some. He took it with a nod of thanks, chewing slowly while keeping his eyes on the darkness around them. "Tell me about your sister," Emma said after a while. "The one in Silver Creek." Jake looked at her, surprised by the question. "Why?" "Because if we're going to walk into that town together, I need to know who might recognize you, who might be able to vouch for your story." That made sense, and Jake relaxed slightly. "Her name's Kate Brennan now. She married a blacksmith named Henry about 2 years ago. Good man. Works hard, treats her well. They've got a baby on the way." "And you were visiting them when the stage was robbed?" "I got there 4 days ago. Stayed for dinner, spent the night at their place, helped Henry in the forge the next day, left the morning after that heading home. I was nowhere near that stagecoach." Emma filed the information away. If his sister could confirm his alibi, it would go a long way toward convincing Walsh that he had the wrong man. Of course, getting Walsh to listen was going to be the hard part. The deputy had a reputation for being stubborn as a mule once he'd decided someone was guilty. "What about you?" Jake asked. "Who are you, really?" "Besides someone who shoots at innocent cowboys." Emma almost smiled at that. "Emma Cole, bounty hunter mostly. Sometimes I do recovery work, finding stolen property. Sometimes I track people who don't want to be found. And someone hired you to find me. Someone gave me information that you'd robbed that stage. Paid me half up front to track you down and bring you in, the rest when I delivered." "Who?" Emma shook her head. "I don't know. It was all done through a third party, a telegraph operator in Phoenix who handles anonymous jobs. All I got was a description, last known location, and a promise of money." Jake's eyes narrowed. "So you were willing to hunt a man for money without even knowing who hired you or if the information was true. The accusation stung because it was accurate. Emma had done exactly that, and it shamed her now. "It's what I do," she said quietly. "Or what I did. I'm starting to think maybe I need a new line of work." They sat in silence after that, the weight of their shared predicament settling over them like dust. Emma knew she should tell him about her brother, about the real reason she'd been so quick to take this job. But the words stuck in her throat, afraid of what would happen if she spoke them aloud. Afraid that Jake would realize she'd been planning to lead him to his death to protect her own blood, and that any trust they'd built would shatter like glass. The sky began to lighten in the east, stars fading one by one as dawn approached. Emma stood and tightened her saddle, ready to move again. Jake did the same, and they mounted up without discussion, riding down the far side of the mesa toward Silver Creek and whatever waited for them there. They reached the outskirts of town just as the sun broke over the horizon. Silver Creek was small, maybe 200 people. with a main street lined by wooden buildings and a church steeple rising above them all. Smoke drifted from chimneys as people woke and started their morning fires. It looked peaceful, ordinary, like nothing bad had ever happened there. Emma knew better. Violence and theft didn't care about appearances. They struck anywhere, anytime, leaving ruin in their wake. "Your sister's place?" she asked. Jake pointed to a building at the edge of town, smoke already rising from its chimney. The blacksmith shop, with living quarters attached. There, they rode slowly down the empty street, every shadow a potential threat, every closed door hiding possible danger. Emma's hand rested on her rifle, ready to draw at the first sign of trouble. But nothing moved except a stray dog nosing through garbage behind the general store. They tied their horses behind the blacksmith shop, and Jake knocked on the back door. It opened almost immediately, and a young woman with Jake's same dark hair and sharp features stood there, her face lighting up with surprise and joy. "Jake, what are you doing back? I thought you left 2 days ago." Then she saw Emma standing behind him, saw the tension in Jake's shoulders, the weariness in his eyes, and her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" "Kate, we need your help," Jake said. "Can we come in?" Kate stepped back, ushering them inside quickly. The room was warm, with a fire burning in the hearth and the smell of coffee filling the air. A tall man with broad shoulders and work-roughened hands stood near the stove, clearly Kate's husband, Henry. He sized up Emma with a careful gaze, then looked to Jake for explanation. Jake told them everything. The shooting in the canyon, the chase, Walsh and his deputies, the accusation of robbery. Kate's face grew paler with each word, and Henry's expression darkened. When Jake finished, Kate grabbed his arm. "You were here when that stage was robbed," she said firmly. "You were helping Henry in the forge all afternoon. We can testify to that."
"Walsh won't care," Emma said.
"He's convinced Jake's guilty. An alibi from family won't change his mind." "Then what do we do?" Kate asked. Emma leaned against the wall, thinking. "We need to find out who actually saw the robbery. Someone must have gotten a look at the real thieves." Henry spoke for the first time, his voice deep and measured. "Old Pete Garner. He runs the stage office. He was there when it happened, helped the driver afterward. If anyone saw something, it'd be him. Where can we find him?" "Stage office, east end of town. But you better hurry. Walsh and his men could show up any time." Emma nodded and moved toward the door, but Kate caught her arm. "You'll protect him, won't you?" "My brother?" Emma met the woman's eyes and saw the same steadiness she'd seen in Jake, the same quiet strength. "I will," she promised, and meant it. They left through the back, circling around behind the buildings to avoid being seen on the main street. The stage office was a small structure with a weathered sign hanging above the door. Through the window, Emma could see an elderly man sorting through papers at a desk. "Let me do the talking," Emma said. "He might recognize you." They went inside, and Pete Garner looked up from his work. His face was weathered like old leather, his eyes sharp despite his age. "Help you folks? We need information about the stage robbery 3 days ago," Emma said. "You were there when it happened?" Pete's eyes narrowed. "I was." "Why? Because the law is chasing the wrong man, and the real thieves are getting away. We need to know what they looked like." The old man studied them for a long moment, then sighed and sat back in his chair. There were 3 of them. Wore bandanas over their faces, but I could tell from their builds. 2 were tall, lean. The third was shorter, stockier. The short one did all the talking. "Hair color? Eye color? Anything distinctive?" The tall one on the left had a scar on his left hand. "Saw it when he grabbed the lockbox. Fresh scar, still healing." And the short one, he had a voice like gravel, rough, like he'd been shouting or drinking too much whiskey. Emma's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. She'd heard it her whole life, growing up in a small house in Texas with a brother who drank too much and dreamed too big, Charlie Cole. Her brother. The short, stocky one with the gravel voice was definitely Charlie. Jake was watching her face. "You know something." Emma couldn't lie to him anymore. Not after everything they'd been through. Not after she'd promised his sister she'd protect him. The short one. "I think I know who he is." "Who?" She took a breath. "My brother. Charlie Cole. He fits the description, and he's been running with some rough characters the past year. I lost track of him a few months ago." Jake's expression hardened. "You knew. This whole time you knew your brother robbed that stage and you were tracking me anyway. I didn't know for sure until just now. But I suspected. And yes, I took money to track you because I thought if Walsh caught you, Charlie would get away clean." Emma met his eyes, refusing to look away. I was going to let you hang for my brother's crime, but I can't. I won't. The betrayal on Jake's face cut deeper than any bullet could have. Before he could respond, the door burst open and Walsh strode in. 3 deputies behind him, guns drawn. Well, well, Walsh said, a grin spreading across his face. Saved me the trouble of tracking you down, both of you, hands up. Emma raised her hands slowly, her mind racing. Pete Garner stood up from his desk. Frank Walsh, you're making a mistake. This man didn't rob any stage. That's not for you to decide, Pete. I was there. I saw the robbers. 3 of them, and this cowboy wasn't one of them. Walsh's grin faded. You sure about that, old man? Because if you're lying to protect a criminal, that makes you an accessory, I'm sure. And I can describe the real thieves if you're interested in actually catching them instead of just making an arrest. Walsh hesitated, clearly torn between his certainty and Pete's testimony. Emma saw her chance. One of them was my brother, deputy. Charlie Cole. Short, stocky, voice like gravel. He's probably heading for the border by now with the other 2. You waste time arresting us. He'll be in Mexico before sunset. And I'm supposed to just believe you? Check with Kate Brennan, the blacksmith's wife. She'll confirm Jake was with her and her husband when the stage was robbed. Check the timing. It doesn't work. We're not your criminals.
Walsh looked at Pete, then at Emma, then at Jake.
Finally, he lowered his gun slightly. If you're lying to me, I'll hunt you both to the ends of the earth. I'm not lying. And I'll help you catch them. I know how my brother thinks, where he might run. The deputy considered this, then holstered his weapon. His men did the same, though they kept their hands close to their guns. Talk fast. Emma described Charlie's likely route, the border crossings he favored, the contacts he might use. Walsh listened, occasionally grunting or nodding. When she finished, he turned to his deputies. Miller, Sanchez, ride to the Brennan place and verify this alibi. You 2 come with me. We're heading south. He looked back at Emma and Jake. You're free to go, for now. But if I find out you lied, there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in. They watched Walsh and his men leave, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Pete Garner sat back down at his desk. That brother of yours better hope Walsh doesn't catch him. Frank's not known for his gentle handling of prisoners. Emma nodded, feeling numb. She'd just betrayed her own blood to save a man she'd tried to kill 2 days ago. It didn't feel noble or right. It just felt necessary, like choosing between 2 kinds of poison. Jake touched her shoulder, his expression unreadable. Don't thank me. I should have told you from the start. But you didn't. That counts for something. They walked out into the morning sun, Silver Creek coming to life around them. Emma felt the weight of her choices settling on her shoulders. Charlie would hate her for this, if he even survived. Her family ties were severed, burned away in the harsh light of truth and consequence. She traded her brother's freedom for her own redemption, and she still wasn't sure if that made her brave or just another kind of coward. Jake stood beside her, quiet and solid, and she realized she'd never answered his question from that first night in the canyon. Fear or desire. Looking at him now, she knew it wasn't either one. It was respect, hard-earned and fragile, built on honesty even when it cost everything. What will you do now? Jake asked. Emma thought about it. She could go back to bounty hunting, chasing other people's sins for money. Or she could find another path, one that didn't require her to compromise pieces of herself until nothing recognizable remained. I don't know yet. Figure I'll take it one day at a time. You? Go home. Work horses. Try to forget the last 3 days ever happened. They stood there in the dusty street. 2 people who'd been enemies and then allies and now something else entirely. The desert stretched out around them, vast and waiting, full of possibilities they couldn't yet name. Emma turned to Jake one last time. If you ever need anything, send word to Phoenix. I'll find it in. Same goes for you. Tucson. Ask for Jake Harris at the Double R Ranch. They shook hands, a simple gesture that felt like a promise and a goodbye all at once. Then Jake walked toward the blacksmith shop to say farewell to his sister, and Emma headed for her horse, ready to ride into whatever came next. Walsh might catch Charlie, or he might not. The money might be recovered, or it might disappear into the desert like so many other fortunes before it. Emma couldn't control any of that. All she could control was her own choices, her own path forward. She mounted her horse and looked back one last time at Silver Creek, at Jake standing with his sister in the doorway of the blacksmith shop, at the life she was leaving behind. Then she turned her horse west and rode into the rising sun, alone but somehow lighter than she'd been in years. The desert had asked her a question that night. Fear or desire, and she'd finally found her answer. Neither. She chose truth instead, whatever the cost. She chose to be someone who could look herself in the mirror without flinching, someone who made hard choices and lived with the consequences. The wind picked up, warm and dry, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Emma let it push her forward, into the unknown, into a future she'd have to build from scratch. Behind her, the past receded like a mirage, shimmering and unreal. Ahead, the horizon beckoned, endless and free. She rode into it without looking back, a woman remade by fire and choice, carrying nothing but her name and her newly forged honor. The desert swallowed her tracks as quickly as she made them, erasing all evidence of where she'd been and leaving no clue about where she was going. And that, Emma decided, was exactly how it should be. A clean slate, a fresh start, a chance to become whoever she chose to be, unbound by blood or money or the weight of old mistakes. The sun climbed higher, painting the world in shades of gold and amber, and Emma Cole rode into it, finally free.